This episode is brought to you by Cars Commerce, one platform to simplify everything about buying and selling cars, and one partner to empower your business. Welcome to this special Disruptive Forces in Retail Automotive episode presented by the David Spizak Show and Disruptive Growth Solutions. So welcome back. I am here joined by a couple of gentlemen that have been in this business. Danny, I don't even know how long you've been in this business because you just look annoyingly young to me. But how long have you been in this business? I mean, Daryl looks rough. Let's just be honest. I look rough, right? Daryl and I spent too much time in the sun or partying or something. So he and I are definitely on a different life trajectory. But how long have you been in this business?
Yeah, I was born into it, David. I'm 41, and I started working. I started when I was 14, but I sold my first car at 15, and that's when I got hooked.
15. David, I personally would request to see a valid driver's license proving that age because there's no chance this guy's 41 years old.
Well, I'm a high mileage unit myself. I'm about a second away from being 65. I've had AARP hounding me for years. And I'm just so far past the magical age of 41. My daughter actually turns 41 today. So you share that birthday. Very cool. All right. So everybody, we're here to talk about profitability. And welcome back. Disruptive Growth Solutions is presenting this particular event. It's called Disruptive Forces in Retail Automotive, Used Car Solved. And if you're going to solve anything for somebody's used car department, and this is something that dealers have been trying to solve literally for decades, is how do we achieve our goal of selling units, growing volume, making gross, but doing it in a profitable way, right? Doing it in a way that we could take some of that gross and see it gently fall down to where some of it is still there by the time we get to that bottom line. Easier said than done, as it turns out. So I've got Danny Zaslavsky. I always screw that up. Is that right? Did I nail it?
You did it great.
Danny Zaslavsky from VinCue. Danny is the co-founder and CEO of VinCue, an advanced technology solution specifically designed for used car operators to help you maximize, obviously, your outcome from acquisition to inventory management to getting the car out the door in a profitable way. And then I've got Darrell Steed here, and Darrell's with Smart Wolf Consulting, and Darrell's got a very interesting path that we won't unfortunately go into, but it's a little bit of a non-typical path in that he started out spending time in dealerships, spent time very unique with KBB, something that a lot of people rely on today, KBB ICO. So he's there from the inside out. He was behind the curtain, and he knows some things. And Darrell now spends time consulting for dealers. And we are going to be joined in a few minutes also by Brian Kramer. Brian, of course, is the GM of AccuTrade, Executive Vice President of Cars Commerce. All of these gentlemen, it's interesting, have a background in retail automotive, and all of them now spend time day in and day out focused on doing exactly what we endeavor to do today, helping dealers create a more profitable used car department. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, Danny, I want to call on you first. You have a unique background in that you were literally born into this business. You just stated you're 41 years old. It's just so annoying. And you've done some really great things, over the course of your career. I mean, you are a partner, you are the principal, I take it, co-owner, co-principal at your independent lot, which is Country, what's the name of it?
Yeah, Country Hill Motors.
That's what I thought, Country Hill Motors. And how long has Country Hill been around?
41 years, same age. Started in 83, the year I was born. And there's a cool story behind that.
And I want to pause there just for a second because for anybody out there, there's new car franchises, there's new car dealers, there's groups out there that are not 41 years old or didn't last 41 years. To stand the test of time as an independent, man, that is a statement of the highest order because you're competing against those very same new car franchise dealers. You don't have leasing, you don't have new car trades, you don't have a customer pay department, you don't have, off lease and loaner cars and all of those other competitive advantages that it would seem that we have on the new car side. And yet you guys have not just survived, but you've competed and you've succeeded over that time. So I really want to hear from you. If we could kick it off with you, what are lessons that you've learned from your independent side, as well as lessons that you've learned through the time you've spent with clients with VinCue that have allowed you and also your clients to be able to achieve that holy grail of profitability in the used car department? What is the difference makers?
I'll give you two lessons. As an immigrant, when immigrants come over, they see opportunity, I think, differently than people who often get opportunity surrounded by them. And I watched my dad come into the car business and quickly figure out that acquisition of inventory was actually the problem. Selling of the inventory wasn't the problem. And so he wanted to figure out, how does he be innovative in acquisition? And so early on, instead of running to the auctions, I remember my dad carrying 2 Nextel phones on him, a black book in each pocket. He was like this calculator that could tell you, he had so much pride in being able to tell you what a vehicle's value was. But that came from the innovation of going to new car stores that didn't know at the time how to move used inventory and acquire them in volume. And we came up with this acronym back in the day called WAR. And to us, WAR stood for wholesale, auction, and retail. Wholesale, as we defined it, is doing business with other dealers, buying and selling. Auction is auction, retail is retail. We wanted to find a niche. And in the beginning, we were a $3,000 to $12,000 price range car dealership because we knew that people buying $30,000, $40,000 cars probably had another car in the driveway that they could rely on. But people buying an $8,000 car certainly weren't getting a $30,000 experience and depended on that $8,000 car a lot more. But we needed to find a proper outlet to be able to do that. And so the discipline to figure out what an acquisition strategy was from the very beginning really put us on a trajectory of then being able to scale that to today using a lot of those same practices and a lot more because today we serve Camping World and Harley Davidson stores and others because guess what? They trade for cars too. And then once we were able to add technology to that, it really got fun.
So if you were to tell a dealership today, I mean, I work with a lot of dealers, as you know, across the country, but from your perspective, because that's what we're looking for, if you were to say, okay, here's 2 or 3 things that are hallmarks of highly profitable used car operations, what would they be?
The first thing is you have to have a culture of acquisition, not just sales. If you don't have a culture of acquisition, you are dead on arrival. And what I mean by that is not just empowering your people with tools or weapons to be able to appraise a car, but really, do they have the ability to think acquisition? So as an example, if you call my store, we'll answer, are you calling about buying a car or selling a car? Changes the whole conversation. When our team does that 100 times a day, you can imagine they think about acquisition and sales. They begin to think differently. I think that is one of the weapons that allowed us to then begin to think, okay, how do we then empower these people to win? I look at car dealerships today that have 40, 50, 60, 150 people on staff, and 5 people can appraise a car. That's ludicrous. We think of leads as the source of growth. Appraisals are the source of growth as well. And so when we can empower an entire team to put numbers on cars in a modern way, to be able to execute in a modern way, to be able to serve in a modern way, it changes the culture, but it also changes the machine that is a car dealership.
So if I can kind of take what you just shared and just make sure that I understand it right, for the benefit of everybody. So basically, I totally agree with you. I mean, it all starts with culture. And I've said, I think the word culture really needs to be split up, right? Because I believe that there's a client culture, there's a work culture, there's an acquisition culture, there's a sales culture, there's a profit culture, right? There's not just one culture. Some organizations struggle just to have any culture, for God's sakes. But culture also means there's standards, there's processes, and there's expectations. Is that fair?
It is.
Okay, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And if once we find the right way, let's just do it that way over and over again. So we have a repeatable and enjoyable process for people that we also know is going to be successful. But I also hear you saying that when you go beyond that culture, which is hard to define for many people, you do have to have processes, like, for example, the way people answer the phone at your dealership, or you do have to have technology. You have to have something that's going to allow you to be able to achieve your objectives, again, in a repeatable fashion, in a predictable fashion.
Totally is.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want to add one piece to that, David, because I think this is really important. As a young guy walking through the floors of NADA or Digital Dealer, I used to get really excited about the next shiny object. And I would buy that thing, I would install that thing, and I would automatically,
and nothing happened.
That technology would inadvertently affect my culture, because if the technology was good, we would have good results. If the technology was bad, we would have negative results, right? But the point is, it isn't technology. Innovation is the process. And when you wrap technology around the process, then you can scale the process. If you wrap technology around somebody else's idea, you're scaling their idea, and it may not fit within your process or your culture. That is a wicked booby trap that we learned early to avoid. And so who's at the steering wheel when you install technology? You are, because you're the innovator with your process.
I agree with you. And one thing I'll add to that before we jump over to Daryl, and welcome Brian Kramer, Executive VP of Cars Commerce and GM of AccuTrade. So the one thing I'll add is, because you mentioned, hey, there's dealerships where only 2, 3, 4 people, 5 people can appraise a car. And it's crazy. What other business can you think of to where every opportunity to be able to accomplish something, in this case, acquiring a car, creates in turn the opportunity to not only sell, but typically to create 2-3 times the gross profit that you would normally make on a sale without an acquisition, right? So you would think, man, I want as many of those as I can. I find it fascinating that companies like CarMax and Carvana, who really have, whether you like them or not, they really have re-engineered things, and they really have just truly disrupted. They've changed the game. The thing that's interesting is the human being in those organizations are highly trained to do a spectacular active inspection, to actively inspect the car, but the technology appraises the car. You see, if they had the people, if they were doing it old school to where we were appraising cars the way we've done for years, there's no way they could possibly acquire the number of cars, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars per year. You agree with that, Danny?
I agree.
Okay. So, Daryl, let's start right there. When it comes to profitability, obviously, profitability is the byproduct of everything that went into that used car operation. In your mind, as you work with clients day in and day out, whether it's their compensation process, their marketing, their acquisition, their pricing, their sales turn, what do you think in your mind are the 2 or 3 things? Actually, let's focus just 1 or 2 things that may sabotage profitability.
So, Danny kind of put it in a nice little package, so I'll just jump on top of the bow. But when it comes to, we'll call it the appraisal process. So to give people both insights, yes. Should everyone be able to appraise a car? Yes. In a perfect world, why wouldn't you want to do that? Why doesn't it actually happen, which is call it the roadblock or the construct of reducing profit, is because of consistency in a dealership, because they don't, like Danny talked about, is if you get a shiny toy and then you don't put it into your process and you try to do their idea, it may not fit. Well, if you're going to do, for instance, I'm a big component of AccuTrade, but if you're going to do anything, is that everyone has to be held to that standard that it happens every time. It's not a guideline, it's a process. which means processes don't change because the weather changed. We do this now. If you make a change to a process, you do it thoughtfully, and then you implement said change. And so when I look at it as, okay, we want everyone to appraise, who's going to ensure that it gets done this way every single time? Because the moment you say, don't worry about that when it's okay, you've blown you've just caused the constructive issue. Because so I think profitability really comes down to that is when you appraise, if you're going to have 5 or you're going to have 50, obviously more people doing the job that in turn drives traffic to your store is an easy answer. But who's going to make the hard decision? Who's the one that's going to say, we do this every time, there's no exception? And like you said, the training, because the technology takes care of it. The technology now with all the algorithms and everything they know, why are we trying to sit there and reinvent the wheel? The training of the customer engagement or customer walk around, the active walk around, whatever people want to call it, who's going to put in the time of training? Because training in a store is almost like a word you don't even understand in most cases. They like, oh yeah, we kind of maybe sort of do that. So I would say the appraisal and training is the number one. You want profitability? Let's go back to the 60s and 70s. Oh, the money was made at the buy. How is that any different than on a trade? Right? So your acquisition, your inspection is the money's made when you evaluate the car. Number 2, I prescribe to this every time. If you want to be profitable, your pay plans have to be derived based on what the stores wants to have happen throughout the course of the transaction. Not if you sell a car, you get paid this. The sell of the car, the trade of the car is one piece of that component, but it doesn't stop her in there. So if you create a pay plan to where they are measured on metrics, whether it be time, whether it be appointment shows and sets, whatever it may be, you're going to now start seeing the experience change. And we've already seen, pick any industry, when the experience is better, people pay more. Every major brand that has a red carpet type of experience where they treat the customer more important than their agenda makes more money and charges more for that product.
So I'm going to challenge that. And it's not that I disagree, because 100%, when there's a superior client experience, people consistently will pay more, and they'll do so happily. I mean, it's interesting. You could go to a Four Seasons hotel and somebody could say, how much is that tuna sandwich? $29. Oh, that seems reasonable. You're right. But you go to an airport and they say it's $15. It's just a ripoff. What's the difference? Obviously, it's a client experience. So I get that. I agree with that. However, I will say that there are people that are out there that I've seen deliver really nice experiences, but have not been able to achieve profitability. And so and you also brought up pay plans. I think pay plans are absolutely critical in order to align people with what the objectives are, to your point. So I'm with you on that. Before I jump over to Brian, to you, I want to circle back to you, Danny, because one of the other major aspects of this that you have learned and have now embedded in your product, VinCue, is the fact of ideal inventory. So funny thing, when a car sells in under 7 days or under 15 days, they are consistently, the average age to sell is under 7 days, 6 days. So you don't need any advertising to sell that car. Well, does that improve net? Sure does. They're profitable. That means you don't need a Mini. Does that improve net? Sure does. And you don't pay any floor plan. That certainly helps net. So you're still going to always have, as you know, in your store, you're going to have fixed operations costs. I mean, you're going to have fixed expenses, semi-fixed expenses, and personnel, period. Those are removable objects. You've got to manage those. But the difference is when somebody, as you've learned, to sell a car, they get the right inventory that allows them to turn 70, 80% or more of those in under 30 days. Doesn't that have an awful lot to do with their ability to achieve profit by having that ideal inventory?
Totally does. But here's David. I think the part that many of us are stuck in is the construct. The construct is we're dealing with outside of VinCue, you're dealing with legacy solutions that have innovated through acquisition over the last 20 years. God bless them, because they've been powerful solutions, but they're not powerful anymore. And what it leaves us desiring is a platform, a weapon, a system that allows us to purchase ideal inventory for the purposes, obviously, lowering customer acquisition costs, raising profitability, but you need the ability to look at things outside of just your own sales, your market demand, your consumer data, your consumer data out of your CRM to bring in what your demand is in there, competitor data. In a modern world, obviously we hear a lot about AI and a lot about machine learning, but it's still disparate in the sense that we don't want the AI doing our background removals, pricing our cars. They're different, right? And when we start thinking about how that lives inside of VinCue, we want to be able to take all of these reports that we as car dealers have been looking at for years and years and years and getting on our aha moments and going out and then changing our processes and taking those out of reports and putting them into signals that we can change behavior in the moment, whether you're green or gray. Doesn't matter how long you've been in the car business. Now you can at appraisals and say, yes, I have an appetite to buy this car. And what Daryl said is something that triggered me, which is we used to think, let's lowball the car. Let's just get it, and because we're gonna get one over on the customer. Doesn't work anymore, does it? Today, we offer highest and best because we know that the inspection process is going to true that vehicle value when we actually touch the car and see it. But in reality, we need to know what's the highest and best offer we can give that customer. Now, when you look at a modern solution that doesn't think just about appraisal, but thinks about the vehicle life cycle process, when you think about the legacy, what Daryl said of the deal, because you're going to trade for that car, depending on the source or channel you acquired it from, we know profitability is going to change. We know that we're going to empower the user, not just for what they know today, but what they can grow into tomorrow. Now you're making impact. Now you're driving signals into people to make profitable decisions without having to send them for thousands of dollars of training to make them experts one day. Let's make them experts today, and let's use the system to be able to drive that behavior.
So, but can we all agree? I mean, profitability, let's just boil it down to its simplest point. I have sales, right? A percentage of that's going to be gross. There's my margin. And then I'm going to have my expenses, and I got net profit. I mean, it's just honestly as simple as that. We don't need to complicate it. So sales, the number one thing there is going to be volume, right? Can I get enough volume? Gross, am I holding enough margin? And that's going to be dependent, again, on the cars I buy, how quickly I turn them, how well my people are trained, do I have effective marketing? All those things are going to go into it. And then at some point, we got to hit that big line in the middle where we go down to expense. So every business has an expense structure. It is an immovable object, no matter if you have a snowstorm, if you have a hurricane, if you have a pandemic, 100-year pandemic, those expenses show up every single day. Do they not? They don't care. They show up. So those things are going to be there. We have to figure out, based on that, two things: having the right expense structure, which includes advertising, floor plan, inventory management, comp, those things. And on the other side, don't we have to master above the line, which is what you and Daryl have been focused on, in order to be able to give us the best chance possible at having something left on our bottom line? Do you agree, Danny and Daryl?
Yeah. One thing I would say, though, that we talk about advertising because you brought up, okay, if you sell it in 6 days, you don't have that is, I think that's also a missing piece to profitability. I see it all the time, and if you guys defer, I would love to be challenged. If you guys see something different, is I go into stores and I'll just use like an AutoTrader or Cars.com, for example. They say they're going to buy the entry-level package, just the basics, 10 cars, whatever it is. And they're like, well, we want to sell more cars. I think that's part of training and education is we have this kind of gatekeeping or this old school mentality is I want to reduce my expense in advertising, but in the same breath, I want to sell more cars. That's not real. If you're not visible, and you could stock the right car for you every time, but if no one can find it, so your website goes into that, third-party advertising goes into, like, you have to still make sure that you are out in the market in order to have the right cars. Because I can tell you from firsthand experience, one of the buying centers I built, it's actually why I think vAuto's market day supply is a absolutely wasted metric. is we'd see 120 days, we'd see 80 days, we'd see 90 days. They were on a very aggressive package. And we knew if we were priced in 1, 2, or 3, we proved that metric wrong every single month. 350 used cars month over month, they still do it. And if they were in that price band, they would sell cars in 30 or 40 days every single month or less. And guess what? They would say 120-day supply. But if we bought the car or understood that metric, if it's that, buy it, you can't pay all the money. But then you price it in that 1, 2, or 3, guess what's ended up happening? You change the market day supply based on pricing alone. So there's so many of these factors we don't want to, as Dan said, we don't want to adhere to because it doesn't work within our construct, right? Like this is what we believe.
Yeah, it doesn't serve us anymore. You're totally right about that.
And so if you understand that or get education or training or whatever it may be, is then you go like this, what if everything I knew, and I've heard you say this, David, like everyone sells 10 cars, then 20 years later, 10 cars, 10 cars. What if everything we knew was wrong?
That's where I think we are, though. I mean, honestly,
and you
Danny
ask
brought
yourself that
something
question,
up.
well, then you have to take the next question, or the next step is assume everything I know is wrong. Then what's the right way? And then you have to go back into exploring different ideas and almost testing, right? Like people say, I was in a Dodge store the other day and they're like, there's no way we want to buy Mercedes. I don't want to buy them. They're not profitable. Well, when you look at their history, they're not profitable because you've never sold them. You've like stayed away from them. You're like almost scared of them because you've got your own mental block about this. So I said, we bought 3 of them over a month. They all sold within 18 days. Every single one of them.
That's right, Daryl, until you're forced to, right? COVID helped new car dealers become great used car dealers. I think we still have yet
paint
to
by
learn.
numbers, but it was paint by numbers, right?
It was paint
there were
by
no
numbers.
cars come in. I don't have a car. This is what I have. It's not what I'm looking for, but this isn't what the customer is looking for, but we have this SUV. It's not the color I want. How much is it? Can I get a discount? It's 40% over what it was a year ago. Okay, I'll take it. I mean, paint by numbers, right? It's a mannequin.
But I think what it did do is it showed when you got those cars, because you couldn't fail, right? Like, I mean, it kind of was that is what it did is it allowed dealers to see in the right circumstance. So take COVID out of it, in the right circumstance and the right understanding of price band and marketability, that you could do something other than what you were ever comfortable with. So yes, it made it easy for them to learn that lesson, but then they still had dealers after that said, hey, we killed it with Jaguar Range Rovers. And they said, let's keep getting them. Now they knew they couldn't sell it 40% over. That's given.
So I want to
now
jump
they
back
knew they had a demand.
I want to jump back to Danny, because Danny, and I didn't mean to hijack your point. I just was thinking, like, anytime I hear about those 3 years, I'm like, nobody was more delighted. I've been in this business 45 years.
What we do now, right?
Yes.
And so we learned that selling used cars actually was possible, right? And it's not just, I'm not talking about $30,000 cars. I watched dealers that were selling $8,000 cars and $12,000 cars in their lot that they didn't know you could ingest it, but you couldn't digest it, because they didn't have the process, they didn't have the people with the mindset, they didn't have the service throughput on those types of vehicles or the certification levels on those vehicles. And now that I feel and I see that we're learning that, I think there's still yet another opportunity, and that's profitable wholesale, because we always think that wholesale should be a net or a loss. And I think that's a mistake, in my opinion, because wholesale isn't relegated to only auctions. Wholesale is also profitable when you're helping dealers across the country, when your price to market and their cost to market are synergistic, and you're moving inventory. We work with dealers all the time that have strategies to keep cars internally, but also have friendlies for the purposes of market extension, so that they can keep serving their customers. And so those 3 key areas are a big area of focus for us.
You know, I want to bring Brian into the conversation from Cars Commerce and AccuTrade. And Brian's got tremendous experience, like everybody else, formerly at a dealership, formerly GM of Toyota of Naples, and now for the last 2-3 years at AccuTrade and Cars Commerce. But before we jump there, and I want this to be your entry point, Brian, is that, you know, Danny at one point mentioned legacy systems that have been out there that were once great. Now not quite the same, right? In terms of their ability to impact, because they're not as modern, not as sophisticated, not as agile, don't have the level of intelligence, data intelligence, right, Danny, in order to be able to allow somebody to optimize. Darrell's talking about, some things that you see regularly in stores, and somebody just brought up, whether I think it was Daryl, whether we've been doing things wrong. I'm sorry if what I'm doing is not rendering, Brian, the outcome that I've been wanting month after month after month after month, year after year, I don't know. Maybe it's not the right thing, and maybe I should shift into a different direction. So as you come into this conversation, and it's all about profitability, dealers have been going out. One of the things that seems to me is they're relying too heavily on auction cars. And auction cars, by the time I pay transportation, I pay auction fees. Sometimes I got to deal with arbitration. That's a whole nother issue. But I haven't heard anybody say, I went to the auction and I paid so much less than I do inside the dealership. Add that to a list of things nobody has ever said, inventory. Right? So what happens is I ended up getting a car that I didn't want and paid way too much for it. Wait a minute, that sounds like what customers are saying for 3 years. I went and bought a car, was not what I was looking for, wasn't the color, I paid more than I wanted to pay, plus the auction fee. That obviously is going to contribute to an inability to achieve profitability, isn't it, Brian?
100%. And we've all been through, I think a big part of the success of used car dealers and used car operations is knowing what not to do as much as what to do. But I can tell you that I was a GM for 20 years and of different dealerships, different franchises in different markets. And it wasn't really until the last couple of years, like the year before COVID and then going into COVID, that I feel like I started figuring things out. And there's a few things. You talk about legacy systems, but there's also legacy biases,
yes,
and all these confirmation biases that have been going on for decades. And I think a lot of times we don't question, hey, we do this, but why is wholesale such a dirty word? And why do I have to retail every single vehicle when I'm forced to do spiffs on late model vehicles, market them 10 times more than I should, and spend more doing all of those things, doing $1,000 spiff to lose $3,000, or burning through all of my power positions on cars.com in order to move a vehicle that I was not the best end user for. They talk about desired units. If you're not the best end user for a vehicle, it doesn't mean you have to retail every single car. And one of the first conversations I had with Robert Hollinshead, calls me on the phone. I kind of thought it was a prank call. I'm like, why is this guy calling me? And he was asking me, he said, where are you sourcing these cars from? And starts grilling me. And I'm like, how do you have access to my inventory? Well, he's got a lot of data at its fingertips, but he said
he's the Wizard of Oz.
Right. That inventory is so desirable. And because I see what, your vehicles are coming offline for. I don't know how much you're discounting them, but you're costing yourself a lot of money, and you would sell more cars if you wholesaled more cars. And I said, Bob, I'm no mathematician, but if I wholesale more cars, I'll retail less cars. And he said, it doesn't work like that. It's exponential. And I think that's an unlock to Danny's point that not a lot of dealers are focused on. Everybody's trying to UA trades, and they're trying to underallow virtually and not in the showroom. And they never get a look at these vehicles to begin with. So when I started following his methodology and I started putting numbers on every sight unseen appraisal, it tripled the number of sight unseen appraisals we had. And it quadrupled the number of appraisals that we did overall by service drive appraisals. Now, the book went down. It was like 32%. And everybody was losing their mind, but I stopped having to be forced to buy cars at the auction. And now I had more inventory than I knew what to do with, to where if it wasn't ideal desirability for me, I was in a position to wholesale. So kind of like these big, used car aggregators that wholesale, what I'm talking about. You acquire 1.2 million cars, you retail 700,000, you wholesale 500,000. And they've got more data than anybody.
What was that, Danny?
They're not doing it for a loss.
No. And look at their K1, for God's sakes. Look at their K1.
Net profit, but it's not even what they're making. That's a big piece, $1,000 a car, whatever it is. But what about the loss they're avoiding? And when people talk about Carvana, they go, oh my God, that's ridiculous, $7,000 a car. Okay, they're really generating $3,500 in the front, but how many independent dealers or people that, even franchise dealers, are generating $3,500 in the front? Not many. And why are they doing that? Because those two companies are acquiring 81 and like 89% of their cars from consumers, whereas dealers are pretty much 50-50. And I think
at best.
Yep.
At best. So that philosophy that wholesale is such a bad thing, I think every dealer should sit there and take a look to see what if you take all your purchase cars out of the mix, what's your PVR? But also, what about if you take all the vehicles that you bought at the auction out of your PVR, what happens? It doubles or triples. And then you're doing numbers like Carvana's doing. So if everybody would just focus on acquisition and their trade capture going from 43% to 70%, now that, to me, that's the biggest impact on profitability. You've got cars you can finance, you can sell service contracts on. There's so many of these cars that we're trying to, I did it, backlot cars, I duct tape it together, put it on the back 40, can't sell a service contract, can't sell maintenance. It hijacks your manager's time and saps their energy to where the sales staff doesn't, they're reluctant to sell it if that's not your wheelhouse. So I think that every dealer needs to identify what are they best at and amplify that and lean into it hard and put the right money on the cars when they're coming through the drive, when they're coming through the curb, instead of only doing it when you're on 4th and 32, trying to throw a Hail Mary all the way downfield at the auction and trying to pay $3,000 more than you should to hopefully break even, to hopefully get a trade. The data on used car transactions, it's not new car transactions. The trade capture is 28%. So like, well, I did it. Hopefully I can get a trade. Hopefully I can get financing. Financing on a used car nationally, 30%. So why would you play those odds when you could be playing in another bucket, acquiring cars from consumers?
Don't you think, guys, and we'll jump back into obviously profitability specifically, but 3 of you separately, it's almost like I could have had you in an isolation booth in a game show, and you've all said construct. And I think it's really important to pull that out because there have been constructs that have existed, and those constructs are built on some flawed information. 2, I do think, I've said forever, and don't hate me anybody, but it's just, I'm sorry, I think it's real. We suffer from irrational optimism, and we believe that somehow we're going to be the one person that can take that salesperson who's never sold more than 7 cars a month, and we're going to turn them into a swan, and they're going to sell 20. Nope, doesn't happen. I'm going to be the one person that could take that Jaguar X-Type, and don't worry, let me take a shot at it. I'm going to make $5,000. Doesn't happen. I'm going to be the one person that could keep a car 95 days and make money somehow, because all of a sudden the car, after 90 days of nobody caring, that car became beautiful to somebody. Nope, doesn't happen. These are all based, to Danny's point earlier, on these flawed belief systems, and it just doesn't work. And you've got 2 people here that have really wicked modern technology in the way I see it, and this is just me, but you've got the most, I think, advanced inventory management solution out there in VinCue that's allowing people to do things by connecting the dots. Having the inventory, it's great, but having the inventory connected to CRM, oh, better. Inventory connected to CRM and even better. Then you've got AccuTrade out there, which is just an absolutely preeminent acquisition tool. And when you look at those 2 tools, when you have them compared to dealers that have been using the same solution for the last 15 or 20 years, that was supposed to improve turn rate, reduce exposure, maximize gross, and increase sales, it hasn't happened. And it's not that, I don't think it's not that the software is bad or any solution's bad, but I think that, to Danny's point earlier, you can't just go out and be a silver bullet seeker, find something, think you're going to bring it in the store, and that solves the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. And that takes a modern solution today. But the last thing I'll say is this, and I want to turn it back to you guys. If I'm going to be profitable, and Brian, you said something really cool, and you may not remember this, but you and I were speaking a number of years ago when you started down this track, and I asked you about it. And you said, you know what, I lose money on some, but David, at the end of the year, I come out, right, on these unseen appraisals. Because basically, those odds are very much in your favor. And you're going to end up with significantly more appraisals, more acquisition opportunities, more of the right cars that put you in a position to sell cars quickly and make money. As we said, that's half the battle. The other half of the battle is below the line. So I want you guys to take everything that you've shared so far. And I want you to let's pretend you guys collectively are my ChatGPT 4. And I'm going to say to you, all right, you are a used car expert who has become legendary in the industry for having the most profitable used car department in the United States year after year after year. What are the 3 things that I can do right now, today, that maybe is not going to get me to your level, but it's going to allow me to advance myself from where I am to being consistently a profitable organization so that I can grow sustainably like that? What should I do?
I'll start. So if we're doing ChatGPT, I say, based on what we have now found with the ever-changing market, is that you're going to want to focus on your acquisition strategy, and not specifically acquisition as a generalization, but your private party, in-store, and service acquisition, where the experience can be tailored and controlled so that you now have a proactive approach to have more vehicles. And I'd add one other thing, and Brian can lead right into this. When you take that wholesale derivative, or that you're wholesaling cars, one thing that has been we use the word construct, so it's great as a construct, is every dealer has been taught from NADA's Dealer Academy to manage their dealer from a statement. And unfortunately, that prism has been put in place by something that worked in the 60s, I think is when those statements came up, or the 70s, is when you look at if you were wholesaling or buying more cars and then wholesaling, we look at customer acquisition costs from a sales aspect. So we say, okay, what do we advertise and what's our customer acquisition cost to get a sale? What if we drove in more people, private party or whatever it may be for acquisition, and they came into your lot knowing that 70% of people don't just sell their car, they're looking to replace it? Does that not lower your acquisition cost because it gives you more potential, which in turn raises the profitability potential?
All right. Who's my part 2 ChatGPT 4.0 answer? Brian, you want to jump in?
I'll go next. So I would say, as everybody has been overplayed, the data is the crude oil of this century, right? And if you take a look to see who all is acquiring vehicles, they have more data so they can make more intelligent decisions. And there's limited data sets, so you want to make sure that you have a software tool that compares yourself to all the vehicles in the market, and not all of them do that. Danny's does, and ours does, but not everybody's does. But I would say that to get all the data, you have to get all the appraisals into your system, and you have to enable and empower your staff to be able to do it and do it easily. Because if it's more of a pain to do it, your process, whatever you want to get accomplished, needs to be the pain of doing your way needs to be less of the pain of doing it the old way or their legacy way. And I think that from a sight unseen appraisal standpoint, without having all that in the system, you can't retarget them. The future of appraisals is sending them pricing updates, no different than Zillow does, or just like Nike did today, and I bought 3 pairs of shoes. Hey, by the way, you've got this, and just went down 18%. And this pair went down 22% that you've been watching. So you can't do that unless you have the data in the system with the PII attached to it. And then everybody needs to look at the loss ratio like you're talking about. When I first started researching that, I was really scared, and I had to sit there and figure it out. And I go, mattresses on Amazon, or Casper, or any of these other ones, Purple, are selling those. How can they afford? They say, if you're not fully satisfied, we'll just send it back to us and we'll take it back. But that only happens 5 to 7% of the time in all these products. And if it exceeds that loss ratio, they stop doing it, right? But when I started doing that, I realized, wow, there's a lot less people. There's only 5% that where we're off, where there's actually a mistake. And nobody focuses on the 95%, to your point, of how much I'm making.
It's human nature.
The premise of Amazon's business.
It's human. It's literally human nature. If you think about this, I say this all the time. When you're a parent and you're raising your kid, one of the things I think you have to be very cautious of is protecting them. Because we protect our parents wanted to protect us from what? What do they want to protect us from? Harm, failure, injury. Yeah. Why are you presuming I'm going to fail? Why did the parent never presume I might actually be good at skiing, or presume I might actually be great, at this or great at that? Isn't that crazy? And so I think that
talked
we
to
have
Dan
this
Cockrell,
we have
who
this
used to run
disposition.
Walt Disney World.
It's crazy. I went into a store and the store said, "Hey, no returns, no refunds, no." I said, I mean, literally, big sign behind the register.
No questions asked.
Why didn't it just say, "Don't shop here," right? And I said, "Are you the owner?" He said, "No, I'm the manager." I said, "Could you help me out? I don't understand the sign." I'm not even looking to buy here. I just walked by and I saw this giant sign that looked so welcoming. No exchanges, no refunds, no whatever. And he says, well, apparently we had about 10%, 7 to 10% of people come back here with stuff they didn't buy here and they try to rip us off. I said, okay. So you basically came up with something that is going to protect you from the 7, but is insulting and offensive to the 93% great clients you have. I think that's such a great point that you bring up, is that why do we have this fear when 95% of the time you're likely to come out and win on the deal and make somebody happy and make a customer?
So I remember having that conversation with you, and the tipping point for me was I was having a conversation with Dan Cockrell, who ran Walt Disney World, and we were talking about something unrelated, and he said, it used to be on Main Street USA, we had all these people that were watching make sure they weren't shoplifting, but we had so much staff, it was making people feel uncomfortable. They started buying less product. And then when they looked at what's the actual loss ratio on what people are stealing, it was like 3.7%. So he said, I'm just not going to have the staff that is in there as like an undercover shoplifting person or the security guards. And they actually no, it went from 5% to 3.7%. So the number went down. People shoplifted less when the security wasn't there. And they obviously, top line revenue skyrocketed because more people were like feeling the way you felt
thinking
about no returns.
Counterintuitive thinking, right, Danny?
Look, I've never scaled a business bigger than the one I'm in today. But I had a very smart person tell me this. They said, trust is everything. When you begin to not run around trying to improve a department through managing the people, you begin to trust the people and you begin to know that they can outrun you. And then, in fact, that's the goal. Mm-hmm. You said something earlier about optimism. We get the great fortune of working with a lot of dealers, and the ones onboarding often will tell us, when I ask KPIs like turn, volume, gross, they'll tell me numbers like their auction cars make $800 to $1,200 PVR, and their trades will make. I can almost recite it, right? But their appraisals start out assuming a profitability of 3,500. And that's where we think the win is. We're high-fiving because look what I just got this car for, and I'm going to make this. In reality, that's actually not the case. And so when we begin to look for the booby traps that exist within appraised recon to actual recon, appraised profitability to actual profitability, market adjustment to lagging indicators, and all these little booby traps that live in a modern way of thinking, then you begin to do what you asked me, which is, if I was ChatGPT-4, how would I answer? Brian said it. Unlock and get curious about the data you already possess. In order to do that, I think our company exists to do two things: efficiency and profitability. That's what we chase. And in people, I want efficiency and productivity. How can I get efficiency and productivity when I'm expecting them to run faster? They're going to run out. I'm going to run out. There's no way. I've got to give them the ability to be more efficient and productive. And so we have large groups that we send secure API files back to them that they can infer back into the Power BI system, so they can get really sharp data out of it, where they think not just right car, right price, but right car, right lot when they're looking at a group. And they have a whole team of central appraisers that are helping stores to make good appraising decisions and putting more money in cars when they need to, and things like that. So data unlocks all those questions. And I think the question is obviously more important than the answer, kind of cliche, but so honest in this moment. The second thing is I think it's time we reorganize the org chart in a car dealership. I think the org chart of a desk and F&I and ownership and then the way we behave, the incentive plans have an opportunity to evolve. Because in order to change the culture, we have to change the incentive plans. And we can't expect our whole team to think about acquisition and sales when only 4 or 10 people in a store actually get paid on it. And so I've seen some of the most successful groups change the mindset through changing incentive plans and job descriptions and goals. And it really begins to change the way everyone behaves. And I think that's really, really good. And the last thing I'll tell you is empower them to be in conversations that revolve around strategy. If you only have conversations with them that revolve around results, you're not actually making anybody better. So when you do cross-functional training and get people outside of their own thinking and bring empathy into it, where they can learn what a technician actually does in a day. So variable and fixed don't have a contentious relationship, but they support each other, again, through data and communication. Now, all of a sudden, you have all the arrows pointing in the same direction, which creates momentum. And so involve everyone in strategy conversations, not just in the results you're seeking. Then it gets, again, really fun.
You know, I loved everything that you guys have shared. I want to throw a question at you just because I've been seeing this more and more and more, and it's really confounding. And I'm somebody that loves non-obvious. I'm somebody that loves counterintuitive thinking, but this is not counterintuitive thinking. This is just, I think, a very distinct trend that's happening below the covers. And unless you study data, to your points, you're not going to see it. You know, it's crazy. Pre-pandemic, the vast majority of deals that were desk had over allowances, not under allowances. Did you know that? And it probably wouldn't surprise you, right? We were selling, I always say this, in the 80s we sold cars. In the 90s we started selling programs, right? And in the after the Great Recession we were selling payments, and then during the 3 years we were selling demand. Now we're just, selling math. But I think it's one of those things where we might be outwitting ourselves. So we may have unwittingly started conditioning our sales managers or our salespeople to do some things that are not in our intelligent best interest. Number one, they don't pursue appraisals, right? They don't understand the value of a trade is 2 or 3 times the gross profit for your statement as the car you're selling to get that acquisition. They don't understand oftentimes that the turn is what's going to dictate your net profit, not your gross, but your net. I was showing a dealer today that cars that he sold under 15 days make 3 times the gross of cars he sells over 30. But you know what's interesting? They also make 8 times the net. 8 times the net. And here's one that's just kind of weird. 85% of all the dealers I measured data across the country, 85% of the deals had a UA, not an OA. What? A UA. Now, if I saw that, I'm thinking, well, I'm not even going to say. If I told you that out of 100 deals, 85% had a UA, how do you think that potentially is impacting my net profit? Tell me, Brian.
I would immediately look at their trade capture and their appraisal efficiency.
They're missing deals.
If they're 70%, right, because dealers that do that typically are 25% trade capture.
Are they not trying? Wouldn't you infer 85% UA, we're trying to rip cars? By the way, am I wrong here? For any store, and that's every store that I know and every store I deal with, they have great intentions. They want to provide a great experience. But you can't say I'm going to deliver frictionless and I want to deliver the best experience on earth. What part of that is ripping my trade? So if you have desk people where 85% of the time are UAing, are they not trying to underallow for what the value of that car is? And if that's the case, the gross profit essentially is not going to be any different. But you know what is? The optics from the customer and the reality that you're probably missing out on trades. Do you guys agree with that?
I would say partly. And the only reason I say that is because I've now seen it where I'm seeing more UA, but in a negative construct for the store. So they've given, let's just say, for example purposes, they use AccuTrade. They gave them the number. They gave the customer number, they showed it, they gave it. And then the store, to then magically make themselves look better, put additional money in there. They put UA in the car so that they would build their deal up, which then puts their used car in a bad position rather than taking the car in. So I think right now you're seeing, yes, UA is increasing, but I think if you took a deeper dive, how many of them are using tools and then insulating their deal so that their gross average, because it goes back to pay plans, looks better, so they look like they're performing better.
And I do agree that happens all too often. I think that goes back to what Danny was saying in terms of give everybody a voice on strategy. Don't just hammer people on results, but and make an aligned. Earlier you were saying, Daryl, we got to make sure that everybody's aligned in a way that is going to put us in a position to have a profitable outcome.
Yeah.
So my last question for you, when it pertains to profitability, we talked about some things that we could do to improve profitability, which so much of that is really having the consistency, discipline, process, buying the right inventory for our market, ideal inventory, pricing it in a way. By the way, here's another one. And Danny, we're kind of inferring this. If your average gross on used cars is $800, why is your average markup $4,000? Could somebody help me with that one? Like, do you not look at your own data? Your average deal is $800. You look at these publics, they don't mark up anything beyond $2,000. You know why? Because they've figured out to maximize gross, you have to maximize turn. You don't maximize gross by throwing some big markup. You have to maximize how many times can I turn that capital in the course of a year. It's crazy.
David, that's what changed for us on that. Start managing by activity. When you can start looking at audience as the currency instead of imagining a desired outcome, then you're going to base yourself in a lot more reality. And now we can focus on how do we acquire the consumer creatively, whether through in-store efforts or through outbound efforts. And now you can start looking at pricing and competitive sets differently. Because you're right, you could have the nicest car with the most build data on it in the best condition, but if nobody wants it, who cares?
Hey, who's the number one? I love that. When you think about the best retailers on earth today, give me a name. Selling products.
Apple, Amazon.
Okay.
Retailers? Yeah, Walmart.
Okay, Walmart, Amazon, Costco. True?
Yeah.
3 just absolute heavy hitters. Do they not all have absolutely tiny margins?
Oh, yeah.
It's just like the first time somebody said, oh, you should be a vegetarian. Don't eat meat. And you think, well, where's the protein come from? They said, I don't know. What's the biggest animals in the world? Elephant, gorilla, hippo, rhino. None of them eat meat. It's like our thinking, these constructs again that we have says, oh, I got to just be eating beef. I got to be eating meat all the time. And it's not necessarily true. It's just what we were conditioned to believe. So can we just wrap this up? Give me your final thoughts. We were conditioned to believe that we should be doing the things that we've been doing, which oftentimes are what our manager taught us, what their manager taught them, and none of them have led to a profitable used car department. Give me your final thoughts, your final takeaway for those that are watching that
I'll start,
you would share with them.
Since we have 2 people on here that have what I consider some of the best technology in the business right now, I would actually ask for them to go back and help all dealers and create we're talking about changing the environment. Let's have a tool to where you can't see cost in the pricing field. Really take it away from them so that we change the market. We talk about it, but we don't do it. If you can't see cost, now you have to use the market data. We've built in the excuse to obviously price to cost rather than market. And then the final thought would be, if you actually treated acquisition in any construct, but I say private party, trade, and service drive because you can control those more, just as important as selling cars. I challenge anyone to put the same focus on that and tell me you're not profitable, because I have now done it with stores, and all we've done is said that selling cars is number 2 and acquisition is number 1.
I buy that 100%. You should be a used car dealer that happens to have a new car franchise, not the other way around. Brian, final thought?
Yes, I think that Look the Book, in its current state, everybody needs to rethink it, because Look the Book by Appraisal Source is really the way to look at everything. And the real metrics that can't be gamified are appraisal efficiency, trade capture percentage. Appraisal efficiency is how many appraisals do you sell relative to how many cars you sell, or how many cars you appraise relative to that. That number should be 2 to 3 times your number. The trade capture number should be no less than 50%, and the target should be 70%. And if you focus on those two, everything else has to take care of itself. The problem is right now, if I go into a room and I ask 50 dealers, how many people, raise your hand if you're above 50% Look the Book. Everybody raises their hand. So what they don't see is they don't see the problem that's lingering. It's like radon gas or something. It's killing them, but they don't see it because it's invisible. And everybody needs to focus on those two metrics. And that's how you turn the used car business around. And that's how you find out what's really happening in your store versus what you think is happening in your store.
Thank you. Danny?
I'm going to agree with Brian and add to that a little bit. We've been really hyper-focused on a signal that we call buyer performance reporting. When you can see clearly every appraisal, acquisition, sale, poach in a dealership, in every department, from point of appraisal through point of sale, active inventory, and see what your intended days to sale are and then what they actually are, what your intended gross is and what they actually are, then you can act in reality and change behaviors to know where should I be chasing the dollar versus doing what I'm used to doing. My dad's really good at going to the auction, and every once in a while he comes home with a new hat. I love my dad, but that's not the carrot that I want to chase. And so the buyer performance reporting has really helped us. And again, it begin with the question. The other thing that I would add is we've really been thinking as dealers, because we've been trained by our OEMs to think CSI forever, but the rest of the world thinks NPS, Net Promoter Score. And when Net Promoter Score is a really interesting way of thinking for a business. And David, you brought this up, talking about Amazon and Walmart and Costco. And what I've heard you say before is they have big teams that think about acquisition in the same effort that they think about sales. And so when I said earlier, change the org chart, let's change the org chart so that we have procurement departments that use data science to begin to think about acquisition in a modern way and use modern solutions to both grow us, because that's what we want to do, and in turn grow themselves. And then we can have some real big impact and level the playing field.
I love it. My final word is this. I have an 80-80-80 rule. I believe, and I've never found, I test this, I can't find an unprofitable dealer that appraises 80% of their cars, sells 80% of their inventory, turns it in a month, and has 80% of their inventory at or below their targeted cost to sale. What happens is you end up in a scenario where you are actively pursuing, and you know, it's too easy to go to an auction, and nothing wrong with an auction. I'm not saying that. It's just, it's always been easier to go there than to do the things that we need to do in order to create and generate the right kind of inventory. But the reality is, any one of these organizations, when they carry the right product at the right prices, revenue happens, right? And at the end of the day, I can't get to profitability unless I have a viable business model. Do you guys agree? Okay. So until or unless we're doing some of those things that have been shared by Daryl with Brian and Danny, and thank you for joining, that's not a viable business model. And negative net profit month after month is not a viable business model. So it's time to change. And yeah, if it's harder, we got to go pursue harder. And I'll say one more thing that may be controversial. You talked about the org chart. And, you know, whether you're a general manager, the owner, the CEO, the COO, to me, the only person that's going to be paid more than a used car director is the general manager. period. There is not, honestly, in today's dealership, a more valuable position in the store, because a great used car director who can make happen what these guys are talking about, there's no
Can transform the entire dynamic of your store.
There's no department that has a more profound impact. Think about this. The impact on the service department, on your F&I department, right? On your cash flow, on return on investment. All those things is used cars, used cars, used cars, used cars. So you got to have there's no way I'm going to have a viable business model. Number one thing to me, you want to be profitable, make sure that you have an A player in that used car director seat. And it's no different than a car. Okay, right. I will pay up for a great used car I can't get anywhere else. I will absolutely pay up for a great used car director.
It's the equivalent of a good quarterback in the NFL. You're not winning the playoffs without.
It's not happening without him.
Right.
Do you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
It's the year of the used car director. With that, gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to join. This has been a great conversation all about profitability. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you for taking the time to join, and make sure you stay tuned, because we've got some other really incredible people to join us as we continue to move through the day. And please stay tuned for the next session. Thanks so much. Appreciate you joining. Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Danny. And thank you, Daryl.